Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you so much for joining me for today's video. Hopping right on into today's topic, maybe you should think twice about buying cheap gear. Now, before I go any further and before I say another word, this video is literally all in good fun, and it's just a way for me to have a conversation with you guys because I've been having this video in my head for quite some time, and I've been pondering like my thoughts and my opinions on the whole like cheap versus expensive gear, and I want to talk about it, okay? So if you like this video or if you just enjoy hanging out with me, please like and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to me. And with that being said, let's get into this hot take, okay? Now, I say hot take because I'm literally like poking fun at myself in the sense that like I know people are going to get riled up by this, but it's literally just a conversation. Anyway, man, you know, on the internet and especially in the guitar community, like there's been this whole shift over the last give or take 3 or 4 years from my own personal experience, you know, being on the internet literally every single day. And like the shift is that like cheap equipment, cheap gear is becoming incredibly affordable. It's getting cheaper and cheaper, and also too it's getting better and better in terms of quality and sound and all the above. Now, there's a million videos out there on the internet explaining why cheap gear is awesome, and there's a ton of different videos where cheap gear is like the way to go. That's the narrative, right? And I'm not disagreeing with that at all the majority of the time. However, there are a few exceptions, and I don't need to explain why cheap gear is better because it's less money, right? It's obvious, right? So this video is to maybe just have a little bit of a counter argument on why maybe cheap gear isn't the better option. Now, as it pertains to, say, a guitar, for example, there is literally no real giant sonic difference between a cheap guitar and expensive guitars, okay? So, like, I'm not making that argument, I'm not making that claim at all. You really can't tell the difference in terms of, like, an audible difference in tonal shift, right? There's lots of creators out there, and I think I've probably made a couple videos out there, if my memory serves correct, where like I've, you know, done the shootout between a cheap guitar and an expensive guitar, and there really is like no giant vast difference between the two. However, one thing I think that people are failing to think about when going the cheaper route is longevity, the longevity of the equipment. So in this video, I want to talk about 3 topics, okay? The longevity of equipment, an audience perspective on equipment, and lastly, comparing and contrasting the user's experience between cheap and expensive equipment, okay? Now, in my opinion, I feel as though if you go the cheap route with a piece of equipment, you will get immediate results and will be able to compete with an expensive piece of equipment immediately. Meaning, if you get a guitar that's 1 day old and that's really affordable, and another guitar that's really expensive and is also 1 day old, they will pretty much do the exact same job. However, in my opinion and in my experience, the cheaper equipment may falter and may malfunction faster than the expensive stuff. I'll tell you guys a couple examples and a couple of stories based on my own experience, okay? Let's take my Squier Vintage Modified Baritone Jazzmaster. That is the baritone, the OG baritone for me, and it's all over this channel. It's been all over the country with me. I've flown with it. I've shot stuff with Victory amplification with it. It's been around the block, right? That guitar is a cheap guitar. It's a Squier, right? You know, they're expensive now because they're highly sought after, but at its core, it's just like what, a $400, $500 guitar. Since I've used that guitar so much, I've had to change all 6 of the tuning pegs from the original version. I switched over to locking tuners from the original stock tuners, and I had to swap out the stock tuners because they were breaking, they were losing like their catch, you know what I mean, like their grip on the string. Long story short, the tuners were like going way faster than, say, another guitar. Let's put that Squier Vintage Modified Baritone Jazzmaster up against, say, my Balaguer Select Custom Toro. Now, the Toro is an expensive guitar. Like, that guitar has a lot of high-end appointments and a lot of TLC from the factory into that guitar. And that guitar has also been all over the country with me, and I've also played a lot of shows with that guitar, and I haven't had to change anything whatsoever. It's never faltered once. It's never, you know, done me wrong, I guess we'll say. And obviously, you know, that's an incredible small sample size comparing and contrasting a cheap baritone versus an expensive baritone. But again, from my experience, the more expensive guitar has held up over time. So to kind of finish up the longevity point in this video, you know, day one equipment, cheap versus expensive, you may not see any sort of like difference at all, and the cheap can probably keep up with the expensive, right? But over time, in my own experience, I feel as though the more expensive, more quality build, we'll say, will last over time compared to, say, a cheap and expensive guitar. Not only with guitars, but also pedals, amps, cables, you know, everything that we use, right? Now, I want to talk about the audience's perspective at a live show. You know, you hear all the time whenever somebody's making the argument to go with cheap gear that the audience doesn't really care what you're playing. the argument always is, unless there's just one or two guitar players in the audience that really cares, the majority of people won't care.
The only opinion that matters is your audience's. They won't care if you have a shitty amp, but they will care if you are out of tune.
But what happens when your audience is a bunch of guitar players, right? Then what do you do? You know, I've been very fortunate enough to travel all over the United States and play, like, for example, 50 shows, give or take, all over the country last year between, you know, multiple tours and stuff like that. And every time I go into a new city, there's always several of you guys coming up to me, just first off wanting to say hello, which is, you know, the coolest thing and will never get old. That's the most wholesome thing of all time. But after the initial hello, guess what? You best believe we're starting to talk about guitar equipment, right? And this past tour, I was traveling with, dare I say, some pretty expensive equipment. Not to like fluff my feathers or be weird about it, but because, I don't know, man, like I personally want to play things that I find inspiring, but also too, there seems to be like a huge sense of appreciation from the audience perspective when I'm playing, say, a 1978 Gibson Les Paul Custom. I'll never forget, there's one specific time in Texas where I was outside just packing up my equipment while Monuments was getting ready to go play. And there's a couple people out there like mingling, some people were, you know, having a smoke, just, you know, shooting the breeze, whatever. And like slowly but surely, like it was like a semicircle of just like a couple guitar bros just hanging out, and we were talking about my Les Paul, and like we were just like geeking out over it. So like I know for a fact that like I and we, the band, was playing to a handful of musicians in the crowd. And one guy specifically said, "Man, it's so cool to see you bringing out an old dinosaur on the road. That is such a unique thing, and I personally really appreciate it." That stuck with me. You know, I'm paraphrasing, but like it was something along those lines. Like that really stuck with me. So, you know, if I was to go, say, the cheap route, you know, and play like, you know, a Harley Benton or an Epiphone, there's nothing wrong with those brands, but I'm just saying, like, I know the person in the audience wouldn't have gotten that same experience from seeing that old dinosaur on stage. I'll give you guys another example, another personal story of mine. I was lucky enough to see Van Halen on the disastrous, quote unquote, reunion tour in 2004. And being a little kid in elementary school who had to stand on the chair just to be eye level with the rest of the audience, I was so enamored by the fact that there was like, what, 4 full stacks of EVH amps, or PV amps at the time, 5152s, and I was able to see the 5150 Kramer guitar played live. I personally will never forget that. The fact that Eddie brought his 5150 guitar out on tour 20 years after it was initially, you know, brought out during the 1984 tour, like, he didn't have to bring out that guitar, but like for whatever reason he chose to bring it out, and you know, whatever the reason, like I got a huge sense of like value out of my own experience from the audience member because I was able to see a very rare and very just special guitar, you know, out on tour on the stage, you know, from the audience perspective. I appreciated that, and I'll never forget that. I would never get that experience if I saw a replica of the Kramer 5150. You know what I'm saying? I'll do you one more example here, one more hypothetical. Let's talk about the Greenie Les Paul, right? There's like 10,000 different iterations of that guitar as of late. Maybe not 10,000, maybe 5, but you know what I'm saying. And most recently, I think it's the Epiphone version that came out. Now, if you're a diehard Metallica fan and you go out and see Metallica and pay, what, $2,000 for 2 seats or whatever, however expensive that is, wouldn't you feel a little cheated if Kirk Hammett didn't play his original 1959 Greenie and he played his Greenie Epiphone copy replica? Wouldn't you feel like that's a disservice to the audience? In my opinion, as a musician, I feel as though if I'm going to a show, I want to be immersed and, you know, completely just like 100% in. And if like I'm not seeing the real thing, meaning the real guitar, and it's like a replica, I'm immediately taken out of the experience and I'm ultimately let down. And I think most people would feel the same way about that. So that's just a long-winded response and a devil's advocate to the fact that like the audience won't care. In my opinion, I think the audience does care. Like, especially if the audience is paying money to see you, you want to give them the best show possible. And if that means like you have to bring your best equipment to do the job, whether it's just a visual thing or whatever, dude, like, I think that's incredibly important, and I think it's like cheating the audience, like if you cheap out on the gear. That's just my opinion. And the last thing I want to talk about is the user experience with cheap gear versus expensive gear. Now, this is where it can be a bit superficial and a bit, hearing with your eyes. And I'm just as guilty of that as everybody else is. But hey, at least I admit it, right? Let's just be honest, man. Let's call a spade, dude. Like if you had an original 1959 Gibson up on stage at Madison Square Garden, you would feel like the shit. You know what I mean? Like, you'd feel like Jimmy Page, right? But if you just had like a, I don't know, an unnamed brand Les Paul copy up there at Madison Square Garden, you would not feel as cool. I guarantee it. You know, like, you know, some people say like, oh, it doesn't matter what I'm playing. I call bullshit on that, like straight up, like, and it's okay to admit that. So my point is like, you always want to feel inspired with the gear you're playing, right? You know, like Deion Sanders, Prime Time. He was all about fashion and image, and like, you know, that was a part of his brand, and like he embraced his fashion with his playing and like made it, you know, interchangeable. So like, you know, you look good, you feel good, you play good. That's a sports analogy. I feel as though that's incredibly valid in the entertainment industry. Like, if you feel good and comfortable and you feel like your guitar is reliable and durable and it's going to do the job and you look cool, like, that's important too, right? You know, people are staring at you. You want to be comfortable in your own skin when people are looking at you. You know, I feel as though like, if you can afford something, why not go for it? There's a saying that I came across on the internet somewhere in the last year, and the saying goes like this: buy it once or you'll buy it twice. Meaning, if you try to buy something that's in replace of something you're ultimately trying to get, you know, if you buy the cheaper variant of the real deal, somewhere down the road, you're probably going to end up just buying either another one because it shorts out on you, it breaks on you, or you're just going to be like, all right, now I can buy the real one. You know what I'm saying? Like, you buy it once or you'll buy it twice. You buy it the first time, get what you want the first time, or you're probably just going to spend extra time and money trying to either get close to it or ultimately buying it eventually, right? It's like that old Cat Williams joke about the Chrysler 300, right?
I got it because it looked just like a Phantom. No, it looked like a Chrysler 300. The f***ed up part is it do look like a Phantom until a Phantom pull up. Then you just in that mother. This is bull. I don't even want to be on this street.
So all in all, everybody, this is literally just a devil's advocate to maybe think twice about buying cheap gear. I am not here to tell anybody what you should or shouldn't buy. I love all types of gear. I own all types of gear, and I honestly own a lot more cheaper gear than I do expensive gear, right? So like, you know, don't get it twisted for a second, man. Like, you can literally play whatever you want. If you enjoy something that costs $2, like, I am so excited for you, and like, that's the bro. Like, if you love your guitar, like, I don't care how much it costs. But like I said in the beginning of this video, I don't always necessarily subscribe to the fact that like cheaper is better. Like, we all know why cheaper is better, because it's less money, right? But, you know, longevity, the audience perspective, and the user experience are three things you should probably take into consideration. All right, everybody, so what do you guys think of my video? What do you guys think of my hot take? Is this a hot take? Probably, right? But anyway, everybody, thank you so much for watching, man. Yeah, if you found this video educational, informational, or if you just enjoyed hanging out with me, please like it and subscribe if you haven't done so, okay? I'll meet you down below in the comments, and we'll have a nice discussion, okay? All right, I'm out of here. See y'all later. Have a good day, all right? Bye.